Let's take a deeper dive into this topic with India-based defence analyst Rohit Dev. Many thanks for joining us on the programme. First of all, I'd love to hear your reaction to this second attack on a commercial vessel with an Indian crew on board.
I see this is looking like more of a very, very unilateral, hegemonic kind of an action in international waters. That ship, whether it was waving the flag of Palau, whether it was registered in Panama City, whether it carried the Indian crew, there are two certainties. A, it was in international waters. B, it was headed to the Gulf of Oman or some other place that direction without any load. So, in terms of the United Nations Convention for Law of Seas, you could intercept a vehicle in the high seas, and it could be for any kind of activity like an unauthorized broadcast or a slave trafficking or piracy. And if you have those inhibitions or those suspicions, then there are laws as per the San Remo manual where you can onboard ships to check. But this kind of standoff strike and then trying to talk about it being a very, very surgical strike on an engine room of a commercial vehicle of some country which you think you have banned or not allowed to, sail through the high seas is very, very unilateral on part of the United States, and which has caused deep anguish in all geopolitical circles because this looks like a very, very, sort of a hegemonic kind of a design. How can you just hit a ship like that on based on suspicion? I mean, suspicion has to be corroborated. You cannot have such targeting where you have all the wherewithal to ascertain what the ship is, even if it's carrying some load or not. There was no load on the ship, and I'm quite sure any camera which you had on your helicopter or aircraft or a missile targeting system which you used had that kind of sort of a reconnaissance of the ship, getting some intelligence and inputs was a primary necessity before you target somebody. And I think the Indian administration has raised this with the Charge d'Affaires of the United States here in Delhi, and it was a very swift response by the Omani authorities based on the Mumbai Maritime Rescue Coordination Center, which initially got the message and also through some family member. What we believe through sources in various form of media are two opinions. That first is that all 24 are safe and sound and they have been evacuated. And in some media, still one is hearing that three of them are still not accounted for. Whichever be the truth, and I just hope and pray that all 24 are safe, firstly. But it does not give the United States of America any kind of such activity to be carried forth. And I think the International Committee of Nations must condemn this because if this continues unabated, then it's no point saying, our apologies and we didn't strike it well, we didn't have the correct intelligence, we went to Iran on a feeling, we struck some ship on a feeling. I mean, this entire debacle of feelings of Trump administration has to be reined in. And I think India has voiced it today to the United States Charge d'Affaires. And I think this matter should be taken up by the UN as well, because there is no sanction against any shipping in international waters for US to be targeting it as a designated, a point which can be hit at their whims and fancies. So I think that needs to end. But yes, on the other side, the Omani authorities have played up very well in this rescue mission. And I think that is what we are thankful for them to be able to rescue our crew, which was of Indian origin. This particular ship, whether it flew that flag of Palau, whether it was a ghost ship as per the US description, but I'm quite sure it had a typical Indian connect because if you go into the history of this ship, where it has docked in the last one year, you will find that many ports are there of the Indian side on the Indian map where this ship has docked. So name is Arihant, can be registered anywhere. And I think it's not only the lives of the Indians which have been saved today, but it's also that if this ship was flying some other flag due to certain norms in which many shipping corporations operate across the world. It's not only the Indian shipping or the Chinese or the
as you
Russians,
say,
but I think...
Indian,
Yes,
sorry to
please.
interrupt, India has summoned the US Charge d'Affaires following the incident and lodged a protest over the attack. And I'd like to know, what other steps do you think India could take in this international scandal? And do you expect condemnation from nations around the world?
I think that is the least expected currently. So condemnation, because it's not only say the Indian crew which was eventually targeted by targeting the ship's engine room. It could be anybody's ship, right? It could be a ship taking any resource in and out of that Gulf. It could be any ship which is of concern to a particular country, and every country has got its sovereign right to deal with any other country in a bilateral manner. So would India be happy if somebody interferes with our trade? Answer is no. Would Russia be happy? The answer is no. Would China be happy? The answer is no. Would US be happy if somebody tries to affect its own trade volume across the high seas? The answer still is no. So I think from that perspective, it is very, very important that the Committee of Nations under the UN banner calls out this unilateral attack. And I think India should put that pressure on the United Nations and bring this topic to the fore, not only in the interest of the Indian trade or Indian sailors and the crew, but also global trade and global lives at large. So I think from that perspective, it is important to call this out. And that is the reason that why the charge d'affaires has been summoned by the MEA in Delhi, and I'm quite sure he would have got a piece of our mind quite well to be communicated not only to the United States but also to other partner nations. From that perspective, I can just also vouch for a fact that these unilateral actions are not being taken by say Israel or Iran in targeting any shipping interest of a country which is in international waters, or it is doing trade with either of them. So I think US would do well to understand the international norms, to respect UNCLOS, and to be able to ensure that it does not strike unilaterally on its own suspicion or feelings any asset which is of any other country. I think that is the message which has to be conveyed to the United States, and there is no greater platform than the United Nations to take cognizance of what has happened, for India to lodge a proper protest. Yes, it could look like a protest coming from one country, but I'm quite sure with a country of 1.47 billion population and an
Right.
emerging market economy, the US would have to take note of what it has done against the interest
Yeah.
of Indian lives.
Which makes me
And I think that
wonder,
must count.
yeah, because India is such a force to be reckoned with, it makes me wonder how big of an impact this will have on relations between India and the US. What are your thoughts?
See, directly, it may not have a many great impact in terms of any animosity developing between the two countries, primarily because the credentials of the ship are yet to be known, of the origin and of the purpose. Right. The only good part is that yes, when the call came for rescue, uh, the Omani establishment through our coordination has been able to rescue all 24. Had it gone Ori, it would have been a different scenario. But yes, it does impose a lot of caution on a country like India, because this was some ship going somewhere into the Gulf with Indian crew. But tomorrow it could be a ship coming to and fro from India with trade commodities with or without Indian crew. Because even if the commodities are coming to the Indian shores from that area and they are being manned, that ship is being manned by a foreign crew, it doesn't change a scenario that India, it's an Indian ship connect which is happening. And Indian Navy, which has been trying to escort ships off the international waters once they come out from the Gulf. I think that would be necessary to be a little more active. You just heard about India's posturing of its submarines and talks, which you must have heard in some news. So I think it's time that India takes care of its own interests, and wherever it is required, with bilateral friendship with other countries and other minilaterals, we should be able to serve each other's interest in that region, so long as this crisis, keeps on a simmer or on a boil. It can go any which way from here as well. But I think primary thing should be that India should have been able to communicate through the charge d'affaires to the US administration today, that we do not take these strikes so lightly, and you would be wise enough not to do it in the future. And it's not only a simple lip service kind of a statement. I think India would mean it, because if this goes awry, many things will be on hold insofar as Indo-US relations going forward are concerned. Because believe you me, the entire chapter would have been so different had you had this strike going through and then losing a substantial amount of those 24 crew members from India would have created a political upheaval in this country in terms of people to take notice. And being a democratic country, so as what US claims to be a democratic country, they actually fear losing one soldier. You imagine India talking in those terms and talking about 24 sailors. I think it's not to be taken lightly. And I think the US must get the message clear. You have to be 100% sure with corroborated intelligence to strike anything in international waters, and that too with some kind of an approval or a sanction or a warning. You
And
just simply can't
do
strike
you
any ship.
think the events of today will have an impact on India's position on the Iran conflict?
Not exactly that India will take a side, because see, this entire Iran conflict is on three or four segments of power. One is Iran, which is very determined to do what it wants to do. One is US, which has started a war it does not know how to close, and the third party is Israel, which is going its own stated objectives to be met. And while we have friendship with all three in some format or the other, whether it's a strategic partnership or a special partnership or a relationship, I think India has been wise to understand that these three powers of whether it's a power of geopolitics or a power of the militaries, they are not the ones who are going to decide what we decide. So we are deciding on our options. Like, for example, that while through this crisis, whatever the Americans must have talked about the Iranians or the oil emanating from that region, India has kept its interest, whether it's our friendship and encouragement with the Russians, or opening new avenues of incoming oil and gas from even the African continent. So I think from that perspective, if you personally ask me, is it going to affect our relations adversely with the United States? The answer is no. Is it going to affect our relationship at all in any negative manner with Israel? The answer is no. Is it going to affect our friendship with the Russians? The answer is super no. And if it's going to affect the relationship with Iran and to make a choice between Iran and US, I think from the perspective and the historical perspective we come as Indians, the civilization values and core values we hold, we are not in for the game to choose an ally in this war among the two warring factions. So I think from that perspective, we are in a different, sort of a sphere. And we would not like to encourage the Americans to hit civilian targets in the Gulf region or international waters. Similarly, we will not encourage the Iranians to, target anything except whom they call their enemies. So if United States is the stated enemy of Iran and vice versa, more than free to strike each other's assets, off. I mean, why should India care? Why should anybody else care? Because it's your personal thing, unless you are flouting international norms, which both of them are in some parameter. The International Committee of Nations has to take a call. The UN is the only organization, partly defunct, which can do nothing in the matter, because for long you have seen unilateral action, especially from the side of the Americans coming into fore, whether it's Syria, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's today happening with Iran. But Iran has got its own mantle, its own mandate of people, the regime. And I strictly believe a country like Iran, with the biology and the ideology that country has, it is very difficult to achieve your objectives the way the Americans are going about, because
Yeah.
they are not only having a war with Iran, but they are eroding the faith of three or four generation of Iranians, especially in two things. One is the Americans themselves, and the second is in the international, Committee of Nations belief
Yes,
of a
I
united
mean,
nation, of having rule of law.
you
So
talk
people will
about,
lose that.
yeah. You talk about the United
So the
Nations. I'm
fourth
so sorry to interrupt you. I want to ask you about your thoughts on how the international community has responded to the US-Israeli war on Iran, because there's been excessive consequences for so many countries that are not directly involved in the conflict. What are your thoughts on how the international community has responded to it all?
the international community has got some big weights, and they've got some medium weights, and certainly very many light weights as well. So as you can see in whatever resolutions or the meetings have happened since the breakout of this US war on Iran, the lightweights have had no say beyond a point. The warring factions, which are not exactly equilibrium in terms of their weight, they have had their say in the United Nations, and obviously they have put across their point only. But the nations which have made a difference is the European Union, it's UK, it's countries like India, Japan, Australia, which have spoken. And obviously, China and Russia also remain on the Security Council's permanent membership, so they have a power to veto as well. So, from these given perspectives, I'm quite sure that whatever the British were trying to do nearly a month ago, when they're trying to form sort of a coalition to talk about things, that is the precise time, if you actually go back in time, that US announced something to do with the ceasefire and talks. So they wrested the initiative from the European Union, UK, and others back to their portfolio to manage this war, which they have not been able to. So I think, insofar as the world is concerned, people have talked about it, leaders have talked about it, some have condemned it, but unilaterally, you don't have a bigger coalition which is condemning any of the two sides which are warring right now. Nobody's taking it to the table of the United Nations except France, which took it briefly, but then you heard nothing about it translating into a resolution. So I think from that perspective, as long as the veto power is with these main countries, and one of them involved in war directly, which is the United States, it's very difficult to get resolutions out against such actions, and that has been the showcase factor for the last decade, where unilateral actions have prevailed over any UN-led action. And in fact, a country like US has never gone to the UN to take permissions. In fact, the current administration actually abhors the UN while it is based out of the United States soil, and they take no cognizance of the UN Charter per se, and simply because they have the veto power and they have the muscle power to get what they want to get done. So from that perspective, it's very even difficult for a United Kingdom, which has got internal turmoil politically in the country, to take any side. So you may have political voices which are different, but you cannot come out unilaterally, and so does the EU. So EU says, you have to come back to Ukraine, fight the war there. US does not want to fight the Ukraine war on their behalf. They want to only sell equipment and material, and tomorrow be responsible for sort of reconstruction of Ukraine, probably, but they're not going to put boots on ground. So I think
Yeah.
from many perspectives, there is a disjoint between the NATO, and that is where I see a lot of these perceptions rising, which actually are aghast with what role play the UN has, what is the NATO going to do about it, and what exactly is this G20, thinking and doing, besides doing these sort of sessions and panel discussions
Indeed. Yeah.
in a country. It is not translating in terms of the economic might of the G20 or G7 into a pertinent decision making of the global order. So the
I
global
really,
order
yeah.
is going by the muscle power.
I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. Rohit Dev, India-based
Thank you.
defense analyst. Thank you very much.